So the first question I will be answering is explaining and critically analyzing the theory of utilitarianism. So utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory that states that the best action is the one that brings about the greatest balance of happiness over unhappiness, where every person's happiness is considered equally. When looking at the theory of utilitarianism, there are four main points that we want to look at that really make up this theory. So the first one is the moral status of an action is based upon the consequences it produces. The second one is the moral worth or utility of an action is quantifiable via the hedonic calculus, which I will go more in depth about later in this question. The third point is that the consequences of these actions are quantified on the basis of the amount of happiness or unhappiness it produces, which I will also go in more depth later. And the last point is that actions that produce more unhappiness than unhappiness are moral, and actions that produce more unhappiness than happiness are immoral, which basically means that the most moral action is the one that produces the greatest balance of happiness over unhappiness when everyone is considered equally. So if you have two groups of people and the majority of these people are happier with this decision than this one, then this group of whatever action that you're doing would be considered moral, and this action would be immoral because it's making the majority of people happy. So going back to my second point, the hedonic calculus is one of the most important pieces in utilitarianism and is used to determine what is good and what action is right. So this calculus was created by Jeremy Bentham, and his belief that happiness or pleasure was quantifiable, and his calculator gave people a way to really visualize this process and quantify these consequences. So whether we really realize it or not, we actually tend to do this every day in our lives. More than likely, when you're doing your day-to-day task, you're going to think of the positives and negatives of that task. So for example, a positive of going to class is that you're gaining knowledge and learning, while a negative of going to class would be maybe you aren't getting to sleep in enough. So the hedonic calculus kind of brings us to our first objective to utilitarianism. The biggest problem with this calculator is that it's trying to quantify a moral theory, which is quite difficult to do. Jeremy Bentham does not give us really a scale of numbers to go by and use in our calculations. So one person's scale could be 0 to 100, and another's could be 0 to 10 when they're ranking their task on a positive or negative scale. The next problem with this calculus is that the value a person gives for each consequence is directly subjective to that person, meaning one person could think of a consequence as very negative while someone else could think of that consequence as something that's not as negative or even positive. And an example of that would be someone could love running and think it is really good for their health, and it could pump them up and give them lots of energy, while someone else could think it's a negative thing because they don't like exercising and it drains them and makes them really tired. So while the calculus is a really great tool for decision making when it comes down to doing tasks and thinking of the positives and negatives, it's not a really good foundation for building and establishing universal moral laws. So the second objection of utilitarianism is that it does not take into consideration other moral factors such as justice, relationships, honesty, and so much more, because it's really only concerned with happiness or unhappiness of the majority of people. The trolley problem is a great example of this. If you were able to stop a train from killing 5 people, but it would kill, say, your significant other, according to utilitarianism, you would have to choose to save the 5 strangers and let your significant other die. Because while this would be devastating to yourself, the majority of people would be happy because those 5 people did not die, and all their family members would be a lot happy, which, when you're looking at the quantity, would be a lot more people than you and your significant other and then your families. So this is why utilitarianism is not really a good staple for universal moral codes, and it really fails to take into account, in this example, personal relationships and so much more. So the second question I'll be answering is regarding to case study 1.6. So case study 1.6 is a study about Carlton Smith, who has a summer internship at a public relations company called James and Madison in New York. Carlton mentions that this firm has many high-profile clients and is considered the gold standard for integrity in the industry. He also mentioned how everyone in the company was required to sign a code of ethics that focused on issues regarding the company, such as professional conduct, confidentiality, and personal use of the office computers, and many other things. So, this code of ethics requires all employees to report any infractions of the code to senior management as well. So, he's picked to be an assistant for a man named Todd Williams. Todd Williams has really helped him gain a lot of experience. They've built kind of a relationship, and he's really helped Carlton basically get his toes in the water in the public relations business. So one day, while Carlton is working at the office, he gets a call from Todd while he was in the middle of a meeting out of town in Los Angeles. And he asked for him to send an article off of his computer as quickly as possible. So while looking for this article, Carlton discovers pornography on Todd's computer while looking through the history of his computer while trying to find it. So the main moral dilemma in this case study is the fact that Carlton found pornography on Todd's work computer and it goes against the company's code of ethics, and he doesn't know if he should report it or not. The stakeholders in this case are Carlton Smith, Todd Williams, and the company itself, James and Madison. So the first moral theory that I think is important to mention is pluralism. Pluralism focuses on the fact that there are several moral dilemmas or values that can line up or contradict each other. So in this case, it is the moral values of Carlton Smith versus James and Madison's moral values as a company. Carlton is left with a tough decision because the only reason he found pornography on Todd's computer was because he looked into his browser history, and Todd asked him to look up this article instead of looking for the article in his browser history. So it is important to note that with the theory of pluralism, obviously moral dilemmas or values can either line up or contradict each other, and really Carlton's moral values could see the pornography on Todd's computer as something that really is not morally wrong, or even though the company would see this as wrong. Carlton could also see this as something that is completely morally wrong and align his moral values with the company James and Madison, and Todd could see this pornography as something that is perfectly fine and something that is not really morally wrong. So the second moral theory that I think is important to mention is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism deals with prioritizing the happiness of the majority of people and only specifically focusing on the happiness or unhappiness of the majority of people. So if Carlton took a utilitarian position to the situation, there could be several different outcomes that could happen. So Carlton could completely ignore that he saw anything on his computer, on Todd's computer, to avoid him getting in trouble first for looking somewhere where he wasn't really supposed to. Todd would still have his job, and Carlton would continue to make good connections and grow his network and leadership skills in the public relations business through him. And the company wouldn't lose an important VP and have to find another employee to replace Todd with. While this would be the most convenient thing for everyone in this situation, it's not the most ethical thing to do. Plus, because Carlton signed a contract that he would report any infractions of code to management, him choosing to ignore the pornography on Todd's computer could potentially risk his internship and possibly get himself a bad reputation before he enters the Public Relations Committee. And also, if it were to come out later that Todd did have pornography on his computer and someone else found it and reported it, and it were to come out that Carlton knew that, he could also get even more trouble and kicked out of the company as well. So to conclude, I think Carlton Smith should report Todd Williams for the pornography on his work computer simply because it's the ethical and right thing to do. At the end of the day, Carlton signed a contract with the company, and while Todd has helped him in many ways and helped grow his knowledge of public relations and really get his foot into this type of business, Carlton could risk everything, his internship and his future, by hiding this secret. So this moral dilemma really is a difficult one because while Carlton did look through his history without permission, he had permission to get on his computer from Todd to look for this article and send it to him during that meeting. And I think it's a really tough decision for Carlton to make, but he should report this because at the end of the day, his future is more important than taking a risk to help someone out in the company that he's working for, even though Todd has helped him out a lot.